Hello everyone, I'm Sheep in the Cart, and welcome back to the series. We're talking about rovers again today. Basically, last time I discussed the basic principles of rovers, such as ground clearance, ramp over angle, roll centres, etc. But I didn't really show off rovers doing anything, I didn't provide any practical examples, and any of that other cool stuff really. There's a lot more on the topic, so I'm going to jump right into it. This is the Rover. The off-roader is what I've named it, because it's sort of like off-roader and a rover. My puns are terrible, so please forgive me on that one. We were focusing on this one yesterday because it provides nice clear examples of the principles. Now I'm going to start driving this rover, which means I'm going to attach it to this pre-provided sky crane. This sky crane is, well, it's not actually a sky crane. The crew simply can be spawned in here, so I can set up tube diary and bill, that's fine. And from this back door, they can actually board the seats. So I just hit EVA and board. It also provides wheels, so it's sort of like when you're landed on a spacecraft with landing legs, or hovering with a sky crane style drop. But this will just fly away and blow up, because we're not really worried about this stage. Well, that's the theory anyway. If you get the staging wrong, like I did when building the thing, you can completely fire the whole rover and crew quite considerably into the sky. But what works well in theory doesn't always work well in practice, so derps happen. Anyway, back, and I'm going to quickly get the people into the rover so we can eject the sky crane, or virtual sky crane, and get on with this. Right, so that's everyone in the rover. Spacebar and levers. Now, the good things about this design of rover is, as I mentioned, it's cross-trainability. The bad things, as you saw there, is it has a pretty high roll centre. So even accelerating too hard on this thing can cause imminent rollover hazards. But in some ways it makes it kind of fun to fly around on Kerblin. On the moon this would be a bit more of a hassle. I mean, I have done it before, you can sustain pretty long wheelies because you can pick it up and just hold it by turning the wheel. Now, to get a bit more stability, as I mentioned in the previous episode, simply lock the rear steering. This might seem counterproductive, but when we're turning, now we're turning more gradually, which gives us a bit more control. So I can hold this wheelie for quite a while. Oh, too much, overcooked it. And I think that aptly demonstrates the problem with this style of rover. Even though it was quite capable, and if it had made it to the other end of the runway, I could have shown off on the pipes that I can crawl over nearly anything in it. It's kind of flawed design. It shows off that it is not really the sort of thing with the survivability to be used in an otherworld expedition. I mean, it's got unlimited endurance from an electrical standpoint, but the chance of you rolling it over and it completely exploding, it can be quite high. So I'm going to show off the other example now, which is, well, look at this is another thing I made earlier, but this same style of crew boarding is the opposite. It's low to the ground, it's pretty heavy, we've got the same number of the same type of wheel, so it's a pretty fair test if you like. We've got a bunch more seats, so two people can actually carry around a complete another crew. And we have a light. Now, on the subject of the light, something I've found through use of rovers over time was, well, having a light on the front looks kind of cool. I recommend not using the lights on rovers. Not only does it add to lag if you're on an older, slower computer like mine, but it doesn't actually draw properly on the ground. I'm going to turn it on briefly on this run just so you can see it, but pretty much on the whole, avoid using lights on rovers. They're fine for finding the moon's surface at night. They're fine for a great many things. Rovers, avoid them. Well, we're driving along now. I'll turn the light on. So you can see it's not lighting a patch in front, it's lighting a sort of a sphere around that pulses when we pass over the textures of the runway. And to make things worse, when we get off the runway, this light's pointing slightly down, so it should be appearing pretty quickly, but it doesn't. It just doesn't show up at all. Now this rover, it looks to be having a stability issue here, but if we lock the rear steering, exactly as I described before, then this rover will actually, it won't roll over ever from turning on a level surface. We can be going at its full speed, continuing the hull forward, and we'll turn. We won't roll. We won't even lean badly. Also, its longer wheelbase means that it's quite stable through jumps and cross terrain. We can sit pretty happily at around the 22 to 23 meters a second, which is like 74 to 76 or so kilometers an hour, or a bit less than, your back roads driving between town speeds, which is pretty quick off-road, all things considered. So we'll get to where we're going. Unfortunately, these batteries in particular are a bit low and a bit vulnerable, so if we get to hard terrain, we can't really crawl through it. We're just going to either belly out or tear off these batteries. The good side is, because we're quite so stable in jumps, we can actually clear some pretty big obstacles just by running at them. And this skid plate's never going to give up on us, and we've got pretty good front and rear angles. We just can't make sure we don't get hooked up on the belly pan. Other things to note about this rover, and it's something I have been seeing a few times recently. Oops, hit that one wrong. As you can see, it's nice to have a low centre of mass. We broke a tyre, but no big deal, right? Jeb can just fall over and otherwise fail to live up to his reputation as a badass. But Jeb, wake up. It's not time to be sleeping. Okay, it appears that Jeb was having such a good time he's passed out on us. Parts of the sky crane. Hello Jeb, get up. Okay. Yep. That aside, the design's reasonably durable, so despite that carnage, low centre of mass and fairly long wheelbase prevented us from cartwheeling too badly out of control, so we landed backwards. We had to stop to fix the tyre, but ultimately we're back in, we're going, we're not damaged. The other rover rolled over, it explodes. I'm sure some of you out there have better designs than this. I'm not trying to say it's even all that good a design, but it does demonstrate the inverse principles to the maximising cross-train ability of the other rover. Now, something else to think about is this rover doesn't have infinite endurance. It has reasonably good endurance due to the fact that it has two RTGs which provide 45 charge a minute. These rover wheels only use about, well, they draw a rate of 0.7, so the draw isn't much greater. Those two RTGs provide just over half the power we actually use to accelerate forward. So when I coast, we charge back up, giving us pretty good electrical endurance. Also, we have this sort of mock rollover protection here with these cubic struts. These really shouldn't be underestimated as a feature. The one time you drop the rover and it lands upside down, in low gravity a Kerbal jumping on this thing will be able to spin it right round. So if we land upside down on the moon, these will protect all the solar panels. The aerials will go, but it doesn't really matter. It's more of a visual than a functional part of the Rover anyway. But back to where I was before I crashed, or nearly crashed this Rover. On other videos I've been seeing a few people asking, how do you get the headlamps on? Well, even when the guys are in Rover seats, the headlamps still work. You press L on the keyboard. Now, unlike the Rover light, you can see that this is working properly and lighting up a small semicircle in front of the design. This helps light up undulations, etc. It doesn't use any electrical power because it's part of the seats. Generally, it's a reasonably good idea. Yeah, and that pretty much concludes this particular Rover. I have another example of what can be done with Rovers, just because they can make a large Rover, a Capsule Rover, or a Pod Rover, if you will. I've used the word Pod Rover here because that's what the game calls all of them, because there's seats and capsules and they've got different names, land can, but the whole tab's called pods, so I've called this one a Pod Rover. Again, I wouldn't recommend using the lights, they're mainly on there for a visual thing, but in this one we don't have the headlights, so yeah, it can be a bit more of a problem. Now, this sort of Rover has another issue which can remain a bit odd. It's that it's got a capsule, and this capsule actually provides reaction wheels, which provide torque. So when I'm pressing forward, you can see the pitch is all the way down. This means that when I drive off something, this capsule is actually turning the Rover downwards. Likewise, I can actually do the opposite. When I'm just beginning to leave a jump, if I press up, or spin the wheels backward, I will actually see how pitched up there by holding it. Ignore the fact that I hit one of the things off, that's not really relevant. This can be a bit handy because it allows you to use the rotation keys, to stabilise rolls and things, but it can also be a real pain because assuming we're skipping over the surface of the moon, so we're going over undulating terrain, I get to something where I want to slow down, like here, holding slow down, holds the Rover, begins to tip it backward. On a big drop or whatever, this can flip the Rover right over. There's two ways around it. We can use docking mode, which is actually what the developers originally, this is what they originally mentioned to do with Rovers, just use docking mode, it'll prevent the issue. Or we can continue in staging mode, which allows us to launch any other stages we may have, and we can toggle the torque. This will prevent the capsule from drawing electrical power to power the reaction wheels, and thus will remain theoretically more stable. An advantage and disadvantage. The disadvantage of these larger designs is sometimes I derp up and crash them. No, advantage and disadvantage of these larger designs is the flexibility. These parts actually flex on the joints. So because the wheels are attached not directly to the Rover body, but instead to these struts, you can see as I'm turning side to side, gaining pace here, how much the total design is flexing. This kind of helps because if you look, we can conform to the terrain a little bit, giving us effectively a bit more suspension travel. But it's also a huge disadvantage because it tends to bump steer the capsule. And bump steer is not good, it can cost lives like it just did. Fortunately, this is just a simulation, we have a restart button. Other things to note is these 8-wheel designs, and maximum speed is going to be about the same as a 4-wheel design, but we draw twice as much electrical power. We can sort of avoid this by turning off some of the wheels, but this can cause some problems too. Having off wheels and on wheels means that effectively the lazy tyres, or the undriven wheels, when they're on a rock or something, are taking load, taking part of the vehicle's weight, which means less of the weight's on the driven wheels, resulting in what they call a lower tractive effort. This will mean that the other tyres, which have less of the weight on them, can spin without actually driving us forward, because they have the same torque but lower weight and thus less grip. Now, as I said before, these headlights concepts don't really work, but for illuminating a ladder, they work fine. This is sort of a large rover concept. An advantage of large rovers is, as I'm demonstrating here, we have these rocket thrusters. This one's designed for moving use, so we're not actually going to here. Just make ourselves lighter and not liable to roll over. The advantage of that, though, is in a low gravity environment like the moon, you can actually pick yourself up and glide out of a crater or land even, just the sun docks and you can land it. It has enough fuel to land. It's not a return vessel though. But it can land independently and be used on the surface. This 8-wheel problem isn't too evident in something of that size. It needs to be almost an 8-wheeler. On the other hand, in a smaller example, such as this one here, even if we take these lights off, I've built this to be a bit derpy. You'll see how quickly we're going to drain our electric charge. 2 batteries should be fine. Powering a pro body, so as this is unmanned at the moment, they'll power a pro body for the full night cycle on Kerblin. So it will go all night happily without problem. The issue is with these 8 tyres, even though this isn't a particularly fast rover, our electric charge is being drained at 2/3 of the rate that whole big Capsule Rover I was driving before did. So even though we're going less than half the speed and we're a tiny fraction of the mass, I mean seriously, this thing's advantage is it's actually heavier than expected, but it's less than 700 kilos. 700. It is 740, sorry, not less than 700. It means that this little rover is going to run out of power really quick. Also, by placing the probe down here, on this rover design I can actually use the capsule torque effectively to be advantageous. Because see how it was trying to wheel stand there? That was actually being fought by the small amount of torque being provided here. So it makes it more stable in this environment. When I'm braking and the vehicle's trying to lean forward, the torque going backward. So in some small cases you can use it to your advantage. For instance, this is turning just on the torque. I'm not using buttons that are affecting the wheels. This is just the capsule torque turning us. And with that, I'm out of power and mostly described on the content. So I've been Sheep in the Cow. I'll see you all next time.